Hey Chevra, what's happening? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we are studying Daf Chafev Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 25. What does Daf Chafev talk about? So it talks about minimizing the area of a karpaf that is too big. So a karpaf that's too big, Yosim vesosaim wasn't hukaf the dira. So how can you make it smaller? What if, as we saw the other day, you want to rezone it for residential use, right? So it was a karpaf that is yosim vesosaim. It was not hukaf the dira, but you want to make it into a residential use. What can you do to make it sort of a residential thing now? We get into the sugya shtickle about tikra, yored, vesosaim, that a roof, the edges of the roof go down to form walls. And then we get back into one of our favorite recurring themes of Masechta Ayruvin, Nifritza b'mlo l'makom ha'asur. So we get into that in the end also. Chevra, let's go weiter. So we're going to begin on Daf Chafei Amud Aleph, second line of the page. Karpaf yosim vesosaim. So if you have a karpaf, and this karpaf is larger than a vesosaim, shelo ukaf l'dira. Okay, and it wasn't. The wall was not constructed for living in, for residential use. So you can't use it. It's a karpaf larger than vesosaim, not for residential use, can't use it. Uva l'mato, but you want to make it smaller, so that if it's less than a vesosaim, well, now you can use it, even if it's not for residential space. So miato be'ilanos lo avimiut. So if you say, you know what, let me just let me just plant some trees, and then I'll plant enough trees so that the remaining untreed area is less than a vesosaim. So we say that doesn't work, because as we know, trees belong in this vesosaim, in this karpaf, because they give shade. They're not really going to be something that is making the karpaf smaller. Rather, it's just going to be really considered part of the karpaf. So that doesn't work. But what you can do is, if you build like a pillar in the karpaf, and this pillar is 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, well, that'll be a significant pillar. And if that's all you needed in order to minimize the area of the karpaf to be less than a vesosaim, then that's all you need to do. Meaning, if the karpaf was a vesosaim plus, daled al daled, so, and by constructing this pillar, you would, the area of the karpaf would now be a vesosaim or less, well then, that would work. Pachas v'gimel lo avimiut. But if all you needed in order to make this karpaf be within a vesosaim was to make a pillar 10 tefachim tall and less than 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, and then it would be enough area, the area would be vesosaim or less, that would not work, because since the pillar is less than 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, it's insignificant. And something less than 3 tefachim is insignificant, and it will just be as if the pillar doesn't exist at all, and therefore you are left with this karpaf that is larger than a vesosaim. Migimel ve'adalid, but what if it was 10 tefachim tall, and its width was somewhere between 3 and 4 tefachim, squared? So then it's machlokas. Rabba amar have miut, Rabba amar lo have miut. Rabba says that this would be significant enough, and if all you needed in order to make this karpaf within a vesosaim or less, so, right, a vesosaim or less, if all you needed was this pillar that was 10 tefachim tall and 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, so according to Rabba, that's fine. That'll work. You can now use your karpaf on Shabbos to carry things. Rava says no, it doesn't work. Rabba Amar have a miut deha nafikle mitoras lavud. Rabba says, look, this pillar is fine. You can use it, because as long as it's 3 tefachim or more, well, it's significant enough that we would no longer be able to apply the halacha of lavud, the halacha l'moshe misina of lavud, right? If you had, let's say, 2 parts of a wall and there was less than 3 tefachim between them, as we know by now, you can consider them as if the space is closed. Once it's 3 tefachim, you can no longer say lavud. And therefore Rabba is arguing that since 3 tvachim is a significant amount of space that we would no longer be able to apply lavud in context of lavud, so therefore it's significant enough that we could say that, if this pillar, if by constructing this pillar you have minimized the area of the karpaf so that it is a vesosaim or less, so then that is significant enough and you can carry in there. Whereas Rava Amar Lo Avi Miut Kevin Lo Avi Makom Dal Lo Chashuv. Whereas Rava says it does not work as a miut because it doesn't work to make the area of the karpaf smaller, because since this pillar is less than 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim wide, it is insignificant. And since it is insignificant, it cannot make the karpaf smaller. Okay? Now, we are going to switch gears. We're going to this was about how to take a karpaf that is too big and make it smaller. We're now going to jump into the question about if you want to rezone it for residential space. And we're going to kind of then jump back to making it smaller and then jump back to the residential space. So basically we're going to have 3 machloks in between Rabba and Rava. Then we're going to have a machlokas between Rav Chizda and Rav Amnuna. But basically the first machlokas is going to be, as we just learned, about having a karpaf that's too big, how can you make it smaller? The second machlokas is going to be how do you rezone a karpaf for residential space? Then the third machlokas is going to go back to making a karpaf that's too big smaller. And then the fourth one is going to go back again to how to rezone the karpaf for residential space. So it's going to toggle between those two. 1, 1, 1, 1. Great. Let's move on. So now you have this karpaf, and the karpaf is larger than a vesosaim, and it was not hukaf l'dira. So therefore you can't carry in it. However, you want to rezone it. You want to put up a new wall, and this time the intention is going to be that it is for residential space that you can carry in there on Shabbos. What can you do in order to, reconstruct this wall for residential space? We saw the other day that you'd be able to, break down part of the wall and then reconstruct it. Here's another option, which is you can. So if you say, you know what, let me just build a whole new wall. Okay, so you have a karpaf, it's, let's say, surrounded by 4 walls. So what you're going to do is you're going to take, let's say you have a northern, a southern, an eastern, and a western wall. So imagine this square. And you go to the eastern wall and you say, you know what, I'm just going to move in, I'm going to go in 3 tvachim from the eastern wall. And I'm going to build a new wall there, parallel to it. So you basically build a new wall. So we say as long as this new wall is 4 tvachim away from the, existing wall, so we can consider it to be a real wall, that you just constructed a wall. And so it was just ki'ilu, now it was hukaf once again, and this time it was hukaf l'shem dira, and it works. Now you have a karpaf that was hukaf l'shem dira, and you can carry in there. So again, if he constructed a new wall in this karpaf 4 tvachim or more away from one of the existing walls, ho'il, that works, and it's considered that it's now hukaf l'dira, and you can carry in there, even though it's larger than a vesosaim. Pachas migimalo ho'il. Now, if he constructed this wall within 3 tvachim of the existing wall, it doesn't work because of lavud. We're going to say that there's no space between them, and you basically just added onto an existing wall, which we learned, I think yesterday, that you can't do that. That adding onto an existing wall doesn't work. Migim Vadalid. What if the existing wall was constructed somewhere between 3 and 4 tvachim? What if the new wall was constructed somewhere between 3 and 4 tvachim away from the existing wall? Rabba Amar Hol, Rabba Amar Eino Moil. So Rabba says that's fine. It works as a new wall and it's hukaf l'shem dira. Rabba says it doesn't work. Rabba Amar Hoil, de'anafik le mitor's love. Rabba says that this new wall is effective because it's already more than 3 tvachim, right? It's 3 tvachim or more away from the existing wall, and therefore that's significant enough that we would no longer say lavud. And therefore, we can give significance to this new wall, and it's hukaf l'dira. Whereas Rava Amar Eino Mo'il Kevin lo Havi Makom Dad Lo Chashiv. Whereas Rava says that this new wall is ineffective because even though it's more than, it's 3 tfachim or more away from the existing wall, and sure, it's, 3 tfachim is a significant enough amount of space that in a context of lavud, we would no longer say lavud. However, it's still not, this space in between the walls is still not a significant space. In order for it to be a significant space, it needs to be 4 tfachim at least, and therefore Rava says that this new wall is ineffective, and we are left with our same situation of a karpaf shelo ukaf l'shem dira, and you cannot carry over there. Rav Shimi masne l'kula, whereas Rav Shimi, basically, he says, look, take these machloksim between Rabba and Rava that are between 3 and 4 tfachim, and says actually everyone agrees that once these things would be 3 tfachim, so then it would be a significant enough space since it's no longer lavud, and rather the machlokes between Rabba and Rava is between 2 and 3 tfachim. Okay, Seder. Fine, let's go weiter. Tachbo tid v'yachol lamod b'fnei atzmo avimiut. So again, toggling back to our original situation, which is you have a karpaf that is too big, and it's lo ukaf l'dira, and you want to make it smaller. So what you do is you just add a bunch of mud to the wall, to one of the walls, until it minimizes the space of the karpaf enough so that is within a vesosaim. Well, a vesosaim or less. So, tachbo, I'm going to read that again. Tachbo tid v'yachol la'amod b'fnei atzmo. If he, slapped on some mud onto this wall, and he slaps on enough mud so that it brings the area of the karpaf to a vesosaim or less, and there's enough mud that even if you would remove the wall, this mud would be able to stand on its own. So have a miut, that would work as a significant enough miut for the karpaf, and now you can carry in there. But what if you put on enough mud so that now the area of the karpaf would be within a vesosaim or less? However, it's not enough mud that it would be able to stand on its own. If you were to remove the wall that the mud is slapped onto, this mud would topple over. So then Rabba Amar Avimiut, Rabba Amar Lo Avimiut. Rabba says it's okay. This mud is significant enough that it can be considered a miut. Rabba says it cannot be considered a miut. Rabba Amar Avimiut, Hashtami Akai. Rabba says, look, I have no problem, using this mud, because even though, sure, if theoretically you would remove the wall, this mud would be unable to stand on its own. But now it's on the wall, and it can stand, and it's making the karpaf smaller, and that's fine. Rav Amar Lo Avimiut Kevin lo yachol lemekem b'fnei atzmo lo klumu. Because Rav says, look, if this mud is unable to stand on its own and can, is only there because it's latched onto the wall, well, that is not significant enough, and this mud we cannot count, and will be ineffective in making this karpaf smaller. Now, once again, toggling back to when you have a karpaf and it's larger than a vesosaim and it's lo ukaf l'dira, and now you want to rezone it for residential space. Hirchik minatel arba v'asa mechitza hoil. So now this, what the case is over here is that you have a karpaf. Now you can actually see in the diagram on 25A2. So you have this karpaf, and like the back wall of the karpaf isn't actually a wall, it's like a big mound. The back wall is basically just one big mound. Okay, and now you basically want to build a wall next to that big mound. So the mound itself is the back wall. I guess it's 10 tfachim tall, and the mound is 4 by 4. Well, I guess really, yeah, the mound is 10 tfachim tall. So it serves as a back wall. And you want to now construct a actual fence around the mound, so that will now be your back wall, and it will be with and this time you're constructing it with the intention of rahukaf lidira, of being used as a residential space. So then it's fine. now this karpaf is a residential space, right? As long as the Gemara says, Hirchik min atel arba v'asu mechitza hoil. As long as this wall is 4 tfachim or more away from this mound, so that's fine. You just constructed a new wall, the shem dira, and that's fine. Pachis migimel, but if this wall is constructed less than 3 tfachim away from the mound, al svas atel, or as I understand it, mamish kilo, on the edge of this mound. So basically, in this case, you're not really creating a new wall. You're just adding on to an existing wall, right? If it's less than 3 tfachim, we'll say lavud, and you're really adding this wall to the existing mound, which is a wall. Or if your mamish just build it on the edge, again, you're not building a new wall. You're just adding on to an existing wall. And the question is, can we assume that adding onto an existing wall is going to be significant for rezoning a karpaf? We've been assuming up until now that the answer is no, but we're going to find out right now it's actually machlokas. So Rav Chizda Rav Amnuna. So machlokas between Rav Chizda and Rav Amnuna. Chadamar hoil v'chadamar lo hoil. So one of them says that this will actually work. Building a wall on top of an existing wall will work for rezoning this karpaf for it now to be considered for residential use. The other opinion is that no, you can't just build a wall on top of an existing wall. That doesn't add any significance. What did you do? You didn't add a wall. There was already a wall. You just added to an existing wall. That's not going to, make this now a residential space. You didn't practically make any difference. Now, Tistayim de Rav Chizda Amar Hoil. So the Gemara wants to say that let us conclude that it's Rav Chizda whose opinion is that adding to an existing wall is enough to make this karpaf now considered to be for residential space. De'itmar, because it was stated, if somebody mamish builds a wall on top of an existing wall. Amar Rav Chizda b'Shabbos b'nichsei hager lo kana. So says Rav Chizda that when it comes to Shabbos it works, but by nichsei hager it doesn't work. What is this talking about? So let's talk for a second about nichsei hager. So if you have a convert, okay, so now halachically speaking, it's considered that when somebody converts to Judaism, so their relatives that they were born with are no longer halachically considered to be their relatives. And the nafkamina is, or a nafkamina is, that if this ger now dies and he doesn't have anybody to inherit him, he didn't get married, he doesn't have any children, and so he doesn't have any legal inheritors according to Jewish law. So then basically his property is hefker, it's ownerless, doesn't belong to anybody. So apparently whoever makes a kinyan first, whoever runs and takes possession of this hefker property, it's theirs. So in order to make a kinyan, you have to actually do something to show some basic level of ownership. So one thing you can do is you can build a fence around his property, and then you did something to show to take ownership of his property. So what happens if instead of building a fence, you just added onto an existing fence? His land already had a fence, and you added on to, I don't know, maybe you made it taller or something. So you added onto the existing fence. So we see that doesn't work. Adding onto an existing fence is insignificant, and you're not kona the property of the ger. And what Rav Chizda is saying is that while in the context of nichsei hager, adding onto an existing fence is insignificant to be considered a kinyan, to acquire his property. However, on Shabbos it works, i.e. if you have a karpaf, and it's larger than a vesosaim, and it's low kaf l'dira, and now you want to rezone it for residential space, adding on to an existing fence would be significant enough, and therefore here in the context of this mound that's at the end of the karpaf, so even building a wall within 3 tfachim of the mound is fine, because you're basically just adding on to an existing wall, and in the context of a karpaf, that's significant enough. So again, Amar Rav Chizda b'Shabbos ho b'nichsei hager lo kana, that Rav Chizda says that on Shabbos, in terms of rezoning for Shabbos, in terms of rezoning a karpaf, that would be significant. Adding onto an existing wall is fine. It's now considered for residential space, but for residential use. But in the context of nichse ager, this would not be significant enough for you to be considered the owner of the property of the ger. V'Rav Sheshes Amar Av b'Shabbos Nami Lo Hoil. Whereas Rav Sheshes says that adding on to an existing wall never works, not even for rezoning a karpaf for Shabbos. Tistaim, okay? So, there you have it. We can safely assume that it's Rav Chisda, whose opinion is that this wall that is constructed within 3 tvachim, or mamish on the lip of the mound, is significant. That's Rav Chisda, and it must be that Rav Hamnuna is the mandam who says that adding on to this existing wall doesn't work for Shabbos. Omer Rav Chisda. Now says Rav Chisda, modeli Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes, who says that adding onto a wall, adding onto an existing wall, does not work for rezoning a karpaf. Nonetheless, he will admit to me, Shem also mechitza alatel shehoil. However, Rav Sheshes would admit to me, says Rav Chisda, that if you would build this fence mamish on the mound, right? Let's say you had this very big mound, and it was larger than a vesosaim. You want to put a kilu mamish mound. You can get up on it, and it's big, and you want to basically put up a fence and use it for residential space, and it's larger than a vesosaim. So even though technically speaking the mound itself is a mechitza, but says Rav Chisda, in this case, even Rav Sheshes would admit that putting up a fence on top of this mound to show that you are enclosing it, the shem dira, that would actually work. My time, how come? Whole of other mechitzos alyonos sudar. Because when you're living or creating space on top of a mound, well then these walls that are created by the sides of the mounds down below, you don't see them, you don't interact to them, you're not really, as we say, right? Be'ovir mechitzos alyonos sudar. Right? We're saying that in that case, when he's really using the space on the top of the mound for his living space, so he's going to be living within the fence that he builds on top of the mound. And therefore, even though technically speaking, you could say that the size of the mound are walls, but since he's not going to see those walls, they're down below. So therefore, if he constructs, he would be allowed to construct fence on top of the mound. And we wouldn't say, but it's, mechitza agabe mechitza, and it's no good. Even Rav Sheshes would say that in that case, these mechitzas would be fine and would be considered a residential space, and you'd be able to have fun up there. By Rabba Bar Bar Chana. Rabba Bar Bar Chana asked the kasha. Nivlu mechitzos atachtonos ve'alyonos kayamos mau. Interesting. So Rabba Bar Bar Chana asked the question, and he asks, what if you have a fence? And then you built on top of this fence. And we don't know yet if it's talking about nichse ager, we don't know if it's talking about Shabbos, but let's just call it a fence for now. So you have this space, it was enclosed by a fence. You then built, right, what do we call it? We called it, where even am I anymore? Mechitza agabe mechitza, exactly. Right, you basically built a mechitza on top of mechitza. So you had this fence over there, and then you built, you made the fence now twice as high, or whatever it is. And then what happened is the fence sunk into the ground, and now essentially the only part of the fence that is actually surrounding the area is the new addition to the fence. So the question is, is this addition now significant, right? We had said adding onto a fence doesn't make a difference. But what about if the initial part of the fence is basically sunk into the ground and all you have left now is your addition? Does it now become significant? So Lamai. So the Gemara wants to know in what context is Rabbi Bar Chana asking. If he's saying, well, for nichse ager. So let's say you have a convert and the convert passes away. There's nobody to inherit him. So somebody comes along and goes to the fence of this convert's property and adds on to the fence. Makes it twice as high. And he wants that this addition to the fence should be a kinyan, that he's making a kinyan on the ger's property, and now it belongs to him. Now we said that doesn't work because making a mechitza, agab mechitza, doesn't make a difference. However, then what happened was the fence sunk into the ground, and all that's left is the fence that this fellow built. So does that become significant? Is he the rightful owner of that property? And what happens if now another person comes and just goes into the property of the ger and digs a little hole? Because that would also be considered, that would certainly be considered significant enough to make a kinyan on the property of this convert who passed away with no relatives. But the question is, by the time that the second person made this hole, the fence had already sunk into the ground, and the only fence that was effectively surrounding the property was this fence that was initially built as a mechitza agab mechitza. So do we say that since by the time this second fellow dug the hole in the ground, the fence was essentially the fence that was constructed by the first fellow, and therefore it should belong to the first fellow? Or do we say that the fact of the matter is that the first fellow was just mechitza agab mechitza, which is irrelevant, and the second fellow who dug something in the ground is actually the owner of the property? So ilay nichsei ager. So if Rabbi Bar Chana is asking about the mechitza agab mechitza within the that then sunk into the ground in the context of a ger, of nichsei ager, well, hainu de yirmiyah bira. Well, this is exactly the case of yirmiyah bira. The Amr Yirmiyah Bira, Amr of Yehuda, Haman Deshada Lifta Apila Da'ara Deger. So what if you have this situation? A convert passed away with no relatives, and somebody wanted to take ownership of his hefker property. So he takes a turnip and he chucks it into the property of this convert, into a hole in the ground, and then right into the hole in the ground, and that's it. Right there, that's his kinyan. He figures he's just gonna chuck a turnip into the hole in the ground, and eventually it'll grow, but in the meantime it's just kind of lying there. And then another person comes and actually then digs a little hole in the ground. So the owner of this property is the second person, the person who dug the hole in the ground, not the person who chucked the turnip into the hole. Because my time, how come? Because be'idna deshada loka shavach. Because at the time that the first person, right, let's call them Reuven and Shimon. So at the time that Reuven threw the turnip into the hole in the ground, no difference was made to the property. Sure, right? Right? And then at a later point, when the turnip starts taking root and it grows into a beautiful turnip tree, well, or in this case, I think it's like a root, right? So it turns into a turnip root. But the fact of the matter is that didn't happen at the time that Reuven threw the turnip into the hole. That happened at a later point on its own. The turnip started decomposing and coming into a turnip root. But at the time that Reuven threw the turnip into the hole, it made no difference. When Shimon now comes and actually digs a hole in the ground, he is now kona this ground, this property. And the same thing applies to when you build a mechitza, agab mechitza. Right, Reuven, when he comes and he just makes the walls twice as high, right, makes the fence twice as high, he didn't actually make any difference. And even though the fence now sunk into the ground, and now the only fence that is left there is the fence that he built, it doesn't matter. At the time that he built it, there was really no difference that was made. And therefore, even though now the only fence that remains is the fence that the addition, Reuven's addition, the fact of the matter is it makes no difference. And when Shimon now hops that fence and digs a little hole, this property of this deceased ger belongs to Shimon. Velinyan Shabbos. Okay, so then maybe Rabbi Bar Chana is asking what the halacha is regarding these additions to the fence regarding Shabbos in terms of a karpaf. Well, have a mechitza nice is b'Shabbos. So the question is, what happens if Reuven built this addition to the fence, okay, and then on Shabbos the fence kind of sunk into the ground, and now l'maisa you have this karpaf that is fenced with this new addition to the fence that was created l'shem dira. So it's basically a mechitza that was created on Shabbos, and we know V'tanya kol mechitza naises b'Shabbos be'mishogeg b'mezid shema mechitza. Well, any mechitza that's constructed on Shabbos, whether it was by accident, whether it was intentional, it's a good mechitza. And therefore, of course, then you'll be able to use this karpaf for residential space. It was, the original mechitzas sunk into the ground, so they're irrelevant. And now, the later mechitzas are now made now on Shabbos, or created now on Shabbos. Those are good mechitzas, and therefore you'll be able to carry in it, in the karpaf. So the Gemara says, yeah, but lavit marala amar Rav Nachman lo shanu ela lizrok aval tatal aser. Yeah, but didn't Rav Nachman say that when we say that these walls are significant, it's only to say that you're not allowed to throw into that area, but you wouldn't be allowed to carry in that area? Kitma de Rav Nachman amazed itmar. No, when Rav Nachman said that you wouldn't be allowed to carry in the area surrounded by these mechitzas that were created on Shabbos, that's only if you did it on purpose, because we don't want you to create these walls on purpose. But l'maisa, if it happened by accident, it will be fine. You can carry in there. Here also, right, the walls just kind of sunk on their own, so these would be good mechitzas. You'd be allowed to carry in this karpaf. Okay, fine. And I guess that's the answer to Rabbi Bar Bachana's question. I guess the answer to Rabbi Bar Bachana's question is, if you constructed these walls on top of walls and then they sunk into the ground on Shabbos, so can you use them? And apparently the answer seems to be yes, because any mechitza that happens on Shabbos would be fine, and you can carry in there since it happened on its own. Fine. So now there's an interesting incident that happened, that there was a woman who saw that there was a property of a convert who passed away without any relatives, and she said, wow, let me take ownership of this property. It's hefker. So what she did was, she added onto an existing fence, which we know doesn't work. Asa ugavra rafak bapurta, and then some other guy came, and he just dug a little hole in the ground. Also the Kama de Rav Nachman ukma biyadeh. And then this fellow ran over to Rav Nachman. He says, hey, Rav Nachman, look, here's this property of this convert. I just dug a hole. Does it belong to me? And Rav Nachman says, yes, it belongs to you. Also, so then she showed up by Rav Nachman and started screaming and yelling and said, what the heck? I had built up, I had added onto the fence first. And he said to her, I feel you, but there's really not much I can do, because you didn't make a chazaka in a way that you're supposed to make a chazaka, right? You need to actually do something to the ground, do something to the property that makes an immediate benefit. You added to an existing fence which doesn't have any immediate benefit. When this person went and dug in the ground, he did something that has immediate benefit. So he made a proper kin and you didn't. There's not much I can do. So the Gemara now gets into the sugya of tikra, yored, vesosaim, right? That if you have an area that has a roof above it, and this roof is flat, so then we treat it as though the edges of the roof go down to the ground, and now you have a wall. So if we have a karpaf, base shalosh, so you have a karpaf, and this karpaf is 3 base sa'ah. Okay, fine. Vikirabo base sa'ah. But then what you did was you covered one of the 3 base sa'ah, you covered with a roof. So now you have 2 sections essentially of this karpaf. You have one section that is open to the sky without the roof, that is 2 base sa'ah. And you have another section that is 1 base sa'ah, and that part is roofed. So the question is, if we view this karpaf in that way, as 2 separate sections, well then you could carry in the entire thing. Why not? Right? Because you have one section that is 2 base, right, a base vesosaim, which you can carry. You have another section that is 1 base sa'ah, and you can carry in there as well. And I assume everyone would agree that you can carry from one karpaf to another karpaf, assuming that, that's the same owner. So that should theoretically be fine if that's in fact how you view things. So the Gemara says Rava, but there's a girsa that changes it to Rabba, and Rashi has that girsa. And also it's machlosin Rabba and Reb Zera, which I think makes sense because they were contemporaries. So I'm going to go with Rashi's girsa of Rabba. So Rabba Amar Avir Keruro Miyasra. So Rabba says that actually we don't view it that way. We do not view it as though the edge of the roofed area creates let's just assume that, you know what? Let's not get into that for now. Rabbah says that we don't view it as two separate areas. Rather, we view it as one karpaf that is 3 base sa'ah, which is too big, and you can't carry in there, right? As Rabbah says, over keruyo, the space that is under the roof, miyasro, it adds on to the other part of the karpaf, which is 2 sa'ah, and makes it too big, and therefore you cannot carry in any of this karpaf. Reb Zera Amar ein avir keruyo miyasro, and Reb Zera says that the space of the karpaf that is under the roof does not add on to the other 2 base sa, right, to the base vesosaim, and therefore it's no problem. You can carry in this karpaf. Lema Rabba Reb Zera beplukta d'Rav Shmuel kamiflige. So let us say that interesting. Okay. I wonder, if you say they're 2 separate sections, then maybe they're not actually 2 karpafs. Maybe you have the 2 sa'ah area that's for sure a karpaf. But if you say this, but maybe you could treat as, right, this third, right, this base sa'ah that has the roof over it, maybe it's just considered indoors and it's just Rosh Hashayachid. That would actually make sense, I think. So maybe that's the point. So according to Rabbah, right, this area of 1 base sa'ah is actually adding on to the other 2 base sa'ah, and now you have it's just a karpaf that is larger than a base vesosaim, and therefore you can't carry. Whereas Reb Zera says that we actually view them as 2 separate things, and now you have a karpaf that's base vesosaim, which is fine. Then you have this other base sa'ah, which I don't know, I guess is maybe just considered like Rosh Hashayachid. I don't know. Let's see. So Lema Rabba Reb Zera beplukta d'Rav Shmuel kamiflige. So let's say that the machlokas between Rabba and Reb Zera is the same machlokas between Rabba and Shmuel in terms of tikra, yored, vesosaim. Do we say that the edge of this roof now goes down to the ground and creates a wall, and therefore it's mamish 2 separate areas? So Rabba would say that we don't say that, and therefore they're not 2 separate areas, and therefore we treat the karpaf as though it's larger than a base vesosaim. Whereas Reb Zera says that we would say tikra, yored, vesosaim and treat them as 2 separate areas, and we don't have any karpaf that is larger than a base vesosaim. So the idmar, as it was stated, achsadra bebeka. So let's say you have a open field, and in this open field there's a pavilion, and this pavilion essentially has a flat roof. And the question is, can you carry in this area under the flat roof? So Rav Amar mutar l'taltal b'chula, Shmuel Amar ein metaltalin ela b'dalat amis. Rav says, look, you can tikra under the roof because tikra, yored, vesosaim, and therefore you can carry in this area. Whereas Shmuel says we don't say tikra, yored, vesosaim, and therefore you don't have walls in this pavilion, and you can only carry up to 4 amis, i.e. you can't carry in this area. So Rav Amar mutar l'taltal b'chula aminu tikra, yored, vesosaim, Shmuel Amar ein metaltalin ela b'arba amis lo aminu tikra, yored, vesosaim. Great. So Rav says tikra, yored, vesosaim, Shmuel does not. Fine. So therefore, let us say that the machlokas between Rabbah and Reb Zera is the same as the machlokas between Rabbah and Shmuel. Rabbah, who says that the area under the roof is added on to the base vesosaim that is not roofed, he holds like Shmuel. That we do not say tikra, yored, vesosaim, and therefore it's just 1 big space. Whereas Reb Zera, who says that we can treat them as 2 separate spaces and there's no karpaf that's larger than a base vesosaim, he says, look, we'll say tikra, yored, vesosaim like Rav. Right, Reb Zera is going to say like Rav and say that the wall goes down and therefore we have 2 separate spaces. So the Gemara says, Ida avida ki achsadra achinami. So the Gemara says, look, if in fact this roofed area in this karpaf was like an achsadra, i.e. it had a flat roof, so then both Rabbah and Reb Zera would assume tikra, yored, vesosaim like Rav, and there would be separate spaces. However, this is talking about where the roof was not flat, rather it was slanted. It was on an angle. And because this roof was on an angle, that is different, and that's why there's a machlokas between Rabbah and Reb Zera. Rabbah says, look, if the roof is on an angle, you cannot say tikra, yored, vesosaim. Therefore, this space that is under this slanted roof is going to be added on to the other vesosaim. We're going to have a space that's larger than a vesosaim. Whereas Reb Zera says a slanted roof, we can nonetheless say tikra, yored, vesosaim, and therefore we have two separate spaces, and we don't have any karpaf that is larger than a vesosaim. Fine. Okay, so that's machlokes between Rabbah and Reb Zera in this space that is 3 beis sa'ah, one of which is under a slanted roof. Now, says Reb Zera, Omer Reb Zera umodina bekarpaf shenifratz bimlo lechotzer she'aser. My time ahol v'aver chotzer miyasro. Amazing. So this mamish gets us right back into the sugya of nifratz bimlo the makom ha'aser. So we're going to have to look at some diagrams over here. These diagrams, this diagram particularly you could find on 25b1, okay? So Reb Zera is saying to Rabbah, and he's saying that, look, even though in this case that we were arguing about where there was a space that was 3 beis sa'ah, one of which was under a roof, and I say that we do not consider it as though the area under the roof is added on to the other 2 beis sa'ah, and therefore I treat them as 2 separate spaces, and there's no area that is larger than a beis sa'ah in this karpaf. However, says Reb Zera, there is a case where I would say that additional space would be added onto the karpaf to say that it would be larger than a beis sa'ah, and this is the case. The case is, now let's look at the diagram on 25b1 on the left column. So you have a karpaf, okay? And this karpaf is exactly a beis sa'ah, so you can carry in the karpaf, okay? And then you also have a chotzer. And this chotzer you can carry in because it's a chotzer, there's no problem. Now once upon a time, there was a wall between the karpaf and the chotzer, and that wall, once upon a time, had a door in it, a pesach, and you were allowed to carry from one to the other, assuming right now like Reb Shimon, okay? And that according to Reb Shimon, you're allowed to carry from a karpaf into a chotzer, and therefore once upon a time, you had a karpaf, it was exactly a beis sa'ah, so you can carry in the karpaf. You had this chotzer, the chotzer you can carry in because it's a chotzer, and you were even able to carry from one to the other because you can carry from a karpaf to a chotzer, assuming like Reb Shimon. But then what happened was, the wall completely broke down. It fell down. And now what you're left with is a situation of nifratz limlo'o to this other space. That you have this karpaf. Now the karpaf individually is a beis sa'ah, so you can carry there, meikar adin. And the chotzer, of course, you can carry in. But there's this space that is completely open between the chotzer and the karpaf, and this goes back to that same thing where now our perspective becomes significant. From the perspective of the chotzer, you could see, right, as we learned, that as long as you have 2 little bits on either side of the breach, so then that would count to seal, close off the space, and you'd be allowed to carry from one to the other. So you can see that in the chotzer, you have some wall on either side of the breach, and the breach is is 10 amos or less. So from the perspective of the chotzer, you basically just have a wall with a pesach, and you can certainly carry in the chotzer, because it's as long as it did an Ayruvin chotzer, so you can carry in there. There's just one of the walls has a pesach in it, but that's fine. However, from the perspective of the karpaf, it's a complete breach. It's a complete breach. And because it's a complete breach, you can no longer carry in the karpaf. Okay. And now we're trying to figure out how exactly we're learning this in the context of Reb Zera, and what this has to do with adding on to a, so basically, the idea is that Reb Zera wants to say, right, so what Reb Zera wants to say is that because, this breach is nifratz b'mlo'o, so we treat it now as though the chotzer is added on to the space of the karpaf, and the karpaf is no longer a beis sa'ah, it's now the beis sa'ah plus the area of the chotzer, and now this karpaf is larger than a beis sa'ah, and now you can no longer carry in the karpaf. That is what Reb Zera wants to argue, right? So that Reb Zera is saying to Rabbah that even though in this case that we were arguing about, when it's 3 base sa'ah, and one of them is under a roof, and we say that the area under the roof, so Reb Zer says, I consider them to be separate areas, and I do not add the area under the roof to the other vesosaim of the karpaf. He says in this case, where there's a karpaf and the chotzer and the breach, he says that he would consider the chotzer to be added onto the karpaf, and now you have a karpaf that's larger than a vesosaim. So now Maskef lo Rav Yosef. So now Rav Yosef asks Akash, he says, V'chi avra mutulo osro? Rav Yosef says, I don't understand how this can make any sense. He says, I don't understand how this can make any sense. You have a karpaf. The karpaf is exactly a vesosaim, even though it wasn't hukaf l'dir, but it's exactly a vesosaim, so you can carry in there. Once upon a time, there was a wall between the two, and assuming like Reb Shimon, you were able to carry between the karpaf and the chotzer, everything was fine. Now, all of a sudden, this wall falls down, and now there's no, it's nifratz mimlo from the karpaf to the chotzer, but the fact of the matter is, you're allowed to carry between a karpaf and a chotzer according to Reb Shimon, and the chotzer you're allowed to carry, and the karpaf you're allowed to carry in. And the chotzer is a residential space, so even if it gets added on to the part of the karpaf, you're just adding residential space, and residential space is okay in a karpaf. So Rav Yosef doesn't understand why Reb Zer would be saying that the area of the chotzer gets added onto the karpaf, and now you can no longer carry in the karpaf. Right? Rav Yosef says, how can you have a situation where that this space, this area, i.e. the chotzer, which is mutter to the karpaf, they can carry from one to the other. All of a sudden, because there's a breach, this chotzer gets added onto the karpaf, and now you're no longer allowed to carry in the karpaf? So Abaye says to Rav Yosef, he says, come on, Reb Shimon. So Abaye says to Rav Yosef, he says, one second. Wait, you're assuming like Reb Shimon, right? That you're allowed to carry between a karpaf and a chotzer. But the Reb Shimon Nami, but even according to Reb Shimon, what about the fact that there was initially a wall between them, and when the wall falls down, there's that area where the wall once occupied. The wall had a certain thickness, and when that wall goes away, that thickness gets added onto the karpaf, and now you have a karpaf that, while when the wall was there, it was a vesosaim, but now that the wall is gone, that area where the wall once was is added on to the karpaf, and now the karpaf is too big, and that's what Reb Zer was talking about. That in this case, because it's nifratz mimloa, i.e. that the wall fell down, well then now the space where the wall was gets added on to the area of the karpaf, and the karpaf is now larger than a vesosaim. Rav Chisda, and Abaye proves his point from Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda says that in this case, of karpaf shenifras from lo l'chotzer, that if you have a karpaf that is completely breached to a chotzer, like our example, chotzer muteris, you're allowed to carry in the chotzer, but the karpaf aser, but you're not allowed to carry in the karpaf. And the question is, why is Rav Chisda so sure that you're allowed to carry in the karpaf, that you're allowed to carry in the chotzer, but not the karpaf? I mean, I can also flip things around, right? And if we look at the diagram on 25b2, let's say you flip things around, and actually it was the chotzer that was nifratz mimlo into the karpaf. So then I could say that in that case, I can carry in the karpaf, because the karpaf is a vesosaim, and it's got those two, kind of walls on the edge of it, and the breach in between is 10 amos or less. So the karpaf I can carry in. The chotzer, however, is nifratz mimlo'o. And assuming like the chachamim right now that you're not allowed to carry from a karpaf to a chotzer, so then basically the chotzer is completely open to a place that they wouldn't be able to carry from one to the other. So in that case, I'd be able to carry in the karpaf, but not in the chotzer. So the question is, why is Rav Chisda so sure that in the case where you have a karpaf and a chotzer and the wall gets breached, that you'd be allowed to carry dafka in the chotzer, but not in the karpaf? I mean, what if we have this reverse case where the breach is completely from the chotzer? Then I shouldn't be allowed to carry in the chotzer. Rather, I can carry in the karpaf. So you know why Rav Chisda is so sure that it's the karpaf that you're not allowed to carry in? So my time, right? Chotzer, my time muter is the izbe legipufei v'azimrin b'mishkachas la ipcha. Right? Sometimes you'll have the opposite, like I just explained, where the brief is really from the perspective of the chotzer. You know why Rav Chizda is so sure that it's the karpaf that you're not allowed to carry in? It's because when you have a karpaf, and then there's the breach, and the breach is from the perspective of the karpaf, well, that area where the wall once was gets added on to the karpaf, and now the karpaf is too big, and it's larger than a vesosaim. And from the perspective of the chutzner, it doesn't really add anything because you can see where the walls are, meaning where the wall fell down. From the perspective of the chutzner, it's not adding anything to the chutzner because that, right, there was already existing. That was just part of the wall. It doesn't, that wall was there anyways when it get breached. It doesn't add anything to the space of the chutzner. But from the perspective of the karpaf, now it's basically this new space. And now it's too big. Whereas if you reversed it, and now you have the chutzner that's kind of in the middle, and right, the chutzner that is completely breached. So even if you would add that space onto the chutzner still, so you made the chutzner a little bit bigger, who really cares? Adding space is really only significant when you have a karpaf that needs to be specifically a vesosaim, and now it's larger than a vesosaim. So therefore, what do we see? So Abai says, look, the Ukimta is talking about where you have a karpaf, and the karpaf gets completely breached. The karpaf gets completely breached to the chutzner. Initially, the karpaf was exactly a vesosaim. Now because of the breach, the area where the wall once was gets added onto the karpaf. And it's now larger than a vesosaim. And that is what Reb Zera is talking about when he says that he admits that in a situation where the wall gets breached, that the space gets added onto the karpaf and now it's too big. Okay, fine. There was a karpaf, and you can see this on the same page, on the bottom, it's the bottom diagram there, on 25b2 in the left column, that you have a karpaf there, and the karpaf is bigger than a vesosaim. But what makes it hukaf l'dira is that there's like a big mansion there on the northern wall of the karpaf, and the wall of this mansion serves as a wall of the karpaf, and that's what makes it for residential space. Right? There's a door from the mansion that goes out into this karpaf, and now it's for residential space, and you can carry in there even though it's larger than a vesosaim. But novel ashisa bar yasa da apadna. But what happened was that this wall of the mansion then fell down. And the question is, there was that wall was what was making it a residential space because it was the wall of a home. But now it fell down. So can you still consider this karpaf to be residential space? So Sover Bevai lememer lismoch aguda gavyasa. So Bevai thought to say, well, let's just rely on the inner wall of the house, right? So even if this wall that's immediately by the karpaf falls down, but just go a little bit further in the house, and then you have this inner wall. Let's use that. So Amrle Rav Papi mishum de'asu mimolae amisu mile moliasa. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Rav Papi responded to Rav Bevai. Now Rav Bevai, of course, was the son of Abaye. And Rav Papi responded to Rav Bevai, and he says, because you come from a family of shortened people, and Rashi says that, there's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says that Abaye comes from the house of Eli. Eli, the Kohen Gadol, his children were acting up. We saw these stories actually in Gemara and Shabbos, and he got cursed. And part of his curse was that his children, right, there won't be anybody who lives to an old age in his family. And Abaye came from that family. So they died young. Interestingly, Abaye was a orphan. So what Rav Papi said is that because you come from a family of people whose lives, are doomed to get shortened, so you also have short perspective on your opinions, i.e., he's basically calling him a fool. And he says, Hanach mechitzas legavoy avidan, levaroi lo avidan. He says, yeah, but those walls, the inner walls of the house are made to be inner walls of the house. They're not made to be outer walls of the house, and therefore we need an outer wall here to serve as a wall for the karpaf, not an inner wall. So Rav Papi disagrees with Rav Bevai. Chevra, that's where we're going to stop for Daf Chafei of Masechta Ayruvin. Let us do a recap of what we learned together. So the Gemara started off with a few different cases that were kind of fluctuating between making a beis sa'ah that is too big smaller, and rezoning a beis sa'ah so that is too big so that it could be for residential space. So I'm just going to go sort of in the order of topic as opposed to the order that they are in the Gemara. So minimizing the area of a karpaf that is too big. So first we entertain the notion of making the area smaller by putting pillars into the karpaf. And so we say if the width of the pillar is larger than 4x4, everyone agrees that it will be significant enough to make the space smaller. And as long as now the area is less than a vesosaim, so then it's fine. You can carry in there on Shabbos. Now, if this pillar is smaller than 3x3 tefachim, everyone agrees that it's irrelevant because it's too small and it's going to be as if it doesn't exist. But between 3 and 4, it's machlokes between Rabbah and Rava. Rabbah says it counts because it's 3 is already significant in that you can no longer say lovewood in lovewood situations. So therefore, it's significant, and as long as it makes the area of the karpaf smaller than a vesosaim, vesosaim or smaller, then you can carry there. Rabbah says it doesn't work. What if you take some mud and slap it on the walls? Now, the thing is, so we say if the mud makes the area smaller, a vesosaim or smaller, and there's enough mud that it could stand on its own, everyone agrees that that works to make the area smaller. However, if the mud is unable to stand on its own, it's not significant enough, so then Rabbah says that it's okay, we could still rely on it, and Rabbah says you can't rely on it because it's completely insignificant. Fine. Now, moving on to the sugya of rezoning a karpaf so that it's now for residential space. So one idea is that you can build a new wall. So if you build a new wall 4 tefachim or more away from one of the existing walls, so then that is a good wall. If it's within 3 tefachim of the existing wall, it's not a good wall because you're just adding on to an existing wall, and that is insignificant. That's the assumption, at least for now. But between 3 and 4 tefachim, so meaning if it's between 3 and 4 tefachim away from the existing wall, so Rabbah says it's fine. Rava says it is not fine and it won't make a difference. Then the Gemara pointed out that actually Rav Shimi says that these machloksim between Rabbah and Rava were actually not between 3 and 4 tefachim, but between 2 and 3 tefachim. Fine. But then we talked about what if you now build this wall next to a mound. So again, we said that so the wall is a mound and you want to build a new wall, and the existing wall is a mound. So like one of the walls of the karpaf is mamish just a big mound. And now you want to build a new wall so that you'll be enclosing it for residential space. So as long as it's 4 tefachim away from the mound, everyone agrees that it will be a good wall. However, if it's less than 3, or if it's mamash on the edge of the mound, so we see that it's machlokes in Rav Chizda and Rav Amnuna / Rav Sheshes about does adding onto an existing wall work in terms of karpafs? So Rav Chizda said actually it will work. Adding onto an existing wall will be significant and it'll make the karpaf now for residential space. Whereas Rav Amnuna and Rav Sheshes say no, it doesn't work. When it comes to nichsei ager, if you have a convert who, I hope I wasn't saying Gentile earlier, definitely meant convert. If you have a convert who passes away without any relatives to inherit him, so then anybody can his property becomes hefker, anybody can make a kinyan on it. So if you think that you're going to make a kinyan by adding onto existing walls, it's not going to work. We then get into the sugya of tikra, yored, vesosaim. So we say that when it comes to a roof that is flat, a flat roof, so then Rav and Rabbah and Reb Zera, they all say that we would say tikra, yored, vesosaim, that the edge of the roof can go down and create a wall to enclose the space. Shmuel says that we don't say tikra, yored, vesosaim. If we have a slanted roof, so then it's machlokes between Rabbah and Reb Zera. Rabbah says that we would not say tikra, yored, vesosaim. Reb Zera says that we can say tikra, yored, vesosaim. And then Reb Zera said that look, even though now this was all in the context of when you have a karpaf that is 3 beis sa'ah, then you kind of put a roof over one of the beis sa'ah. Reb Zera says that the area under the roof would not be added onto the other 2 beis sa'ah to make it, larger than a vesosaim. He doesn't say that, but Reb Zera says, look, I would agree to you that when it comes to a karpaf that is nifritzav lo to a chotzer, that the karpaf would now be considered too big, and Abaye explains that is talking about when the area where the wall was is now added onto the area of the chotzer. So then now the chotzer becomes too big, and when the area where there was the wall gets added onto the karpaf, now the karpaf is too big and you can no longer carry over there. Chevre, that was daf chafei of Masechta Ayruvin. I sure hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.